Noswaith dda, good evening everybody. Lovely to see you all and welcome to tonight's event for the love of the game, cariad y game. Mae'n hyfryd gweld cynifer o chi yma. It is lovely to know that so many of you are joining us virtually. It is a shame we can't be in one room together, but I'm sure we'll enjoy the discussion anyway. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Catrin Heledd. I'll be the chair this evening, and a bit about myself. I work for BBC Sport Wales as a journalist, and usually as chair, I guess my role would be to tell you a bit about housekeeping. I tell you where the toilets are, where the fire exits are. Well, obviously this evening, I don't need to do that. If you're joining us from home, hopefully you're all fully aware of where the toilet is and where the fire exits are. So nothing to add in that respect. But what I do need to tell you is that this is a bilingual event. Mae hyn yn rhywbeth dwyieithog, and if you want to ask a question in Welsh, please do so. I speak Welsh, one of the panellists speak Welsh. We've got a learner as well on the panel. So please feel free during the hour to put your questions in the Q&A box below, and also any English questions that you have. There will be some time at the end, and hopefully we can answer as many questions as possible. And as for the translation, you've probably noticed that there's a little button, an interpretation globe, if you like, on the screen. If you click that and then click English, hopefully when we do speak Welsh, pan 'yn ni yn siarad Cymraeg, you'll be able to follow the translation. So if you're not a Welsh speaker, can I urge you all to press that interpretation button and English. Brilliant. Right then, let's start this evening's event. And just to let you know that this is part of the GWLAD events programme held by the Senedd to discuss our experiences to build a more equal Wales for the future. Now, I probably don't need to tell you that COVID this year has been a massive part of our lives, and it has affected sport, of course. And we here in Wales, we love our sport, we love our rugby, football, Commonwealth sports, Olympic sports, everything. It's so, so important. And we punch above our weight in so many sports. And grassroots as well, the sports clubs, they are such an important part of our communities. So it's not a surprise really that this COVID pandemic has affected all aspects of sport over the last year or so. So hopefully over the next hour or so, we'll be able to look at the effects and hopefully how we build to the future. And I'm very happy to say that we have a stellar lineup of panellists joining us this evening to talk about their experiences so far and to also look to the future and how we rebuild, if you like, sport and make sure that we're not left behind after what's been a tough few months. So I start by introducing the panel. We've got Sarah Powell, Chief Executive of Sport Wales. We've got Steve Phillips as well, the new Chief Executive of the WRU, the Welsh Rugby Union. And we've got Jonathan Ford as well, the Chief Exec of the FAW, Football Association of Wales. Welcome to you all. And thank you very much to start for giving your time this evening. I know it's a very busy period. You do Zoom calls throughout the day. The last thing you want to be doing at night is one of these, but it's so important to have you joining us this evening. Diolch yn fawr iawn. So if I can start by asking you maybe just to say a bit about your role within your organisation and a bit maybe about your background, how you are, where you are, and yeah, how possibly COVID has been challenging over the last few months. I'm not going to pick on Steve because he's the new kid on the block. So possibly, Jonathan, would you start us off and give us a bit about yourself and your background?
Yes, certainly. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you very much, Catrin, for the opportunity to be here this evening. Jonathan Ford, Chief Executive of the Football Association of Wales. I've been in post for the last decade, and pleased to say I've been at the helm of the organisation during what has really been quite a purple patch for the association. Delighted, obviously, with the progress that we've made, both on and off the pitch. Of course, our national teams have gone from strength to strength. As we saw them, of course, qualify for the first time in many, many decades and get through, of course, to the semi-finals of Euro 2016. I was behind, of course, the Champions League final here in 2017 and, of course, the more recent success, of course, both with qualification for Euro 2020 in 2021 and, of course, the promotion just recently from League B to League A of the Nations League. But it's not just about our national teams, it's about, you know, the whole of football from top to bottom, and I'm delighted to say that throughout that period, we've gone from strength to strength. Don't get me wrong, still a long, long way to go, but delighted the progress we've made and very, very excited about the future that we have as well.
Brilliant, Jonathan, thank you. Sarah, would you like to go next?
Diolch, Catrin, and noswetha. Good evening, all. I'm Sarah Powell, the Chief Executive of Sport Wales. I'm 7 years as the Chief Executive. We have the responsibility of investing in both grassroots and elite sport. A little bit about me. I got hooked on sport, let's say, back in my school days with my teacher introducing me to hockey, where I went on to play internationally, representing Wales at the Commonwealth Games in Kuala Lumpur in 1998. So a very passionate sportswoman. I then went into education and looked at teaching and a volunteer coach at community level, and then all the way through to working at Sport Wales as the Elite Performance Director and now as the CEO. We have a collective vision to make sure that everybody has a lifelong enjoyment of sport. So that's my role. Bit of a tough one around these challenging times, but you know, hugely proud of the organisation and the impact, as you've already alluded to, Catrin, how important sport is to Wales.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Steve.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity, Catrin. A little bit about me. I am, as Catrin called me, the new kid on the block. I've probably been post now probably about 3 months, but I've been with the WRU since 2007. So I think, you know, massive honour to be offered the opportunity, but also comes with it the acute responsibility of, you know, what the role entails. So I am Steve Phillips. I'm the CEO of the Welsh Rugby Union, and a little bit like Jonathan, really. You know, we've been managing a lot of challenges, and you know, they start as financial challenges, but that's not really the issue. It's the consequences onto the wider game. So I've been very pleased with the way that, you know, we've managed that. We've kept our, you know, community clubs afloat, and we've helped the regional game as best as able. And it's massively refreshing to get the international game back up and running, albeit it's not the same without crowds.
Yeah, we'll get on to talk about crowds, I'm sure, later on, especially with the announcement in England. I just want to know a bit more maybe about your experiences with the pandemic. I think if we go back to March, right in the middle of the Six Nations, and we started to hear that, you know, games were being cancelled, I don't think anybody thought that we would be here in this situation, facing Christmas without crowds, without many sporting events happening, especially grassroots level. Jonathan, your sort of experiences from a professional point of view, the challenges that this pandemic has thrown at the Football Association of Wales, you know, where do you start, I guess? There have been so many, I would have thought, over the last few months.
Absolutely. I mean, going back to March, I do remember on the eve of the Six Nations match, Wales versus Scotland, we just pulled the plug on football across the UK. And that was a lot of the catalyst. It was before the government even actually said, you know, no more events. Of course, you remember Cheltenham Festival happened. I was literally around the corner, and, you know, we decided that morning to pull the plug. And it was only at that point that really the full weight, I think, across the UK and across Wales was felt. And that's when the panic buying really did start. But going back to the Football Association of Wales and the challenges that we face, of course, we're a business. And like many others, we've been forced to make really difficult decisions this year. I mean, we're a not-for-profit organisation. All of the money that we make goes back into the game. And so as you can imagine, you know, over the past, you know, 9 months or so, we've had to have major budget cuts on the basis that our income has been completely depleted with some of our major funding sources, including, of course, the fans that I'm so delighted to say come in their droves when we're playing. Of course, you know, we've had to stop some of our national teams playing. We've had to reorganize the staff group. We've had to redeploy an awful lot of people. We've had to furlough an awful lot of people. But that is all to ensure that the FAW is in a position where we can face not only the current, but also the future challenges. Of course, the decision to curtail domestic football was one of the hardest ones we had to take. It was April. We'd not quite got to the end of the season. We had to make that really difficult decision, initially to postpone, but then to curtail the season. What happened after that? We ended up with a high court action against us. I'm pleased to say we won, but it wasted an awful lot of time, effort, and money on what really we should have been directing our efforts in other areas. Of course, a major challenge to us is not only the inability to play football, but it's also for our fans to engage, both at a local, domestic, and also international level. I mean, you've got to remember, a lot of these clubs, it's the community. It's where they go, where they support their local teams. It's where they go to their local bars, especially around Wales. They are the community hubs. And without those community hubs, it's really, really desperately sad for those communities. And that's having a massive impact. But probably by far the biggest impact has got to be on the participation. It's on those people that actually play week in, week out. And one of my major concerns is our figures, understandably, have nosedived. The number of registered players in this country has taken a major hit. And ultimately, my concern is that that will probably take a little bit of, probably about a decade to bring those numbers back. And of course, that's got major knock-on effects to the health and well-being of all of the people of Wales. You know, sport has a fantastic role to play in people's health and well-being. And without their local sport, without being able to go to their local gym or other things, I really do worry that this pandemic has got not just a major health issue with regards to physical health, but also mental health.
Steve, would you say, you know, Jonathan was alluding there to the financial challenges. Has that been the main issue for the WRU, you know, trying to get out of this the other end, and also to try and make sure that the regions get out the other end, and also the clubs?
Yeah, that's the primary focus. So, you know, the challenges that, you know, that I face and that WRU face are very similar to those of Jonathan's, really. So, you know, we, you know, a little bit like Jonathan said, you know, we cancelled Wales Scotland, you know, on that March day. We did that by ourselves. That wasn't, you know, government instruction and on reflection. And I'm so glad that we did that. But you know, you come back to, you know, you lose income and then you've just got to adapt. Now, you know, we can definitely adapt the WRU to, you know, to reshape itself, but it's the consequences thereof that's the problem. So, you know, we've already gone public and said, you know, we've had to raise a £20 million loan to assist with our regional colleagues. We've managed so far to keep our community funding, you know, in line. But, you know, that's got to be with a view to that we're back to normal probably now in, you know, for us, autumn 21. You know, the other thing that people forget is, you know, we're now in the middle of a sort of autumn Nations Cup. We should have last week been playing the All Blacks. So I think, you know, we've been very agile and flexible. So we've conjured up as a Six Nations, this autumn's Nations Cup, where, you know, and that's just a reflection that, you know, New Zealand couldn't come and Argentina couldn't come and South Africa. So we've been very flexible, very agile. You know, I sit those Six Nations and, you know, I don't think we've ever worked so well together. But it really boils down to, you know, Jonathan's point, really, you know, exactly like the football clubs, the rugby clubs, you know, they're beat to the community. And it's not just the playing or the reffing or the coaching, it's the volunteering. And let's be blunt about it, it's the social aspects of it, you know. It's where people want to go, it's where people want to go on a pint, it's where people want to be with their friends. And that's the stark thing that's, you know, that's really hit us all. And I can't really say enough about, you know, how great the volunteers in the, you know, in the clubs have been. But, you know, it just brings back, you know, how important sport is. And, you know, just from my angle, you know, there's a rugby play as well. But and I think there's other knock-on effects as well that people don't realise, and I'm sure Jonathan is wrestling with the same issues. You know, you've got a staff point here. You know, there's a people strategy. You know, we've had up to about 150 people on furlough since March. Now, you know, we invest a lot of time trying to keep them, you know, up to date. There's a mental well-being piece here because they, you know, this is very strange to them as well. And I think coming back on the crowd point, you know, I was fortunate enough to, you know, to that warm-up game we had in France, in Paris, you know, last week in October, where it was. And I've been there many times, you know, it holds 80,000 people. And I think I had the upper deck to myself. It was the most surreal experience I've ever had. It's the first time I've ever been to a test match rugby where you can actually hear the players shouting at each other. It was a bit unbelievable, to be honest with you. But, you know, so the sooner we get crowds back, not just for financial reasons. You know, I said publicly about 2 weeks ago, I think the players need the crowd, the supporters, and the supporters need the players. It's just, when you look at it, is, you know, what is wrong with this picture?
Yeah, I'll touch on crowds actually, because I think it is an important thing to discuss. But first of all, Sarah, I just want to ask you, I guess the challenges that you face might be a bit different because there was this confusion at the start of the pandemic and sort of halfway through about what was elite sport and, you know, it was tough maybe to differentiate between who could go and train and who couldn't. And maybe for your organisation, it was tough to be sort of policing that. Was that a challenge?
I'm not going to use the word policing, but it is a challenge. I think, you know, as soon as the pandemic hit, the number one thing, this was about a public health crisis. And I think that was the first, you know, first and foremost, it was about the health of the organisation and the people who work there. But then it turned very quickly to, okay, what does it mean for sport? Sport stopped pretty much overnight. For us, that means our purpose had changed very quickly. And it was about then looking at how we brought the sector together so that we could communicate, we could understand the issues that were being faced, working with the likes of the Welsh Sports Association. And really, you know, it was so important for the sector to unite around this. And I think one of the things that, you know, I would look at from sport is that sport, from the outset, has wanted to be part of the solution to the pandemic, not actually adding to the problem. And it really did take its role in this very, very seriously, and about what it could do and what it couldn't, what it should do and what it couldn't do. And I think one of our roles has been very much around listening to the sports sector and taking that information in our role back to government to work with them around the regulations, understanding the implications of those regulations on sport and the wider leisure sector, which has really been impacted by this as well, and trying to make sure that, although we understood, number one, that public health had to be, you know, foremost, what is it that we could do within a safe environment? And, you know, I'm delighted to see the under-18s back, under-11s back, enjoying sport outside. We know we're frustrated. We want to see more sport, but there's a bigger societal picture here that we've had to keep working within. And, you know, you picked up on the elite sport aspect, really, really important. Tokyo's not far away. We've got the Commonwealth Games and it'll be a different Tokyo, we know that. But 2022 Birmingham, making sure that the Welsh athletes who've worked so hard to train and prepare and be selected for the Olympics, Paralympics, or for the Commonwealth Games is really important. And being able to protect that and enable them to train through both the fire break and the regulations has been really, really important.
And maybe a word about the help and the support practically and financially that you have been able to give your athletes, rugby clubs, football clubs, athletes, elite, from grassroots right up. I don't know who wants to start. Maybe Sarah, you can start, because you were talking there about, you know, Birmingham coming up, Tokyo before then. Practically and financially, what kind of help has Sport Wales been able to offer?
Well, the good thing is the Welsh Government has really seen sport as a priority, not only from its messaging around getting out and using your 1 hour to make sure you stay active, but also in investment. You'll have seen that we were able to repurpose, you probably repurposed alongside the recovery package, over £30 million into sport. That's been through a number of schemes, Be Active, right at the community level, to a freelance scheme that has actually just been launched today, to recognise there are, you know, a variety of different levels that we need to invest in, from the organisations in front of us today to small community clubs. They're the real lifeblood of sport. And if we can't protect them and help them to prepare for what comes after COVID, you know, we really are going to lose the foundation of sport, which is so important to us. So, you know, Welsh Government really have put their money where their mouth is and been able to support. I'm not saying it's gone far enough. I'm not saying there isn't more demand and more need, but it's certainly it's enabled us to protect as best we can to date.
Jonathan, you're nodding.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. But I'll probably look at the support in two sides. One of them, of course, is the wellbeing support, and then the other is the financial support. I mean, on the wellbeing support, I think we all understand the impact that COVID-19 has had on people's lives, and how this can create worry, you know, for everybody. But also, let's be honest, you know, those people who are already suffering from mental health issues, it must be even more so. You know, of course, mental health is important as physical health. You know, I'm pleased to say in July of this year, the FAW, together with the Football Association, the Scottish Football Association, the Irish Football Association, joined what was called a mentally health football initiative. It was run by actually, you know, the royal family. And it was a massive declaration to ensure that we made mental health a key priority at all levels of the game. And of course, you know, very important that we make sure that that is translated all the way through to clubs. And of course, we wanted to do that to ensure that we had what we call mentally healthy clubs at every level. Of course, at the start of the lockdown, here in Wales, we actually joined one of the charities, Powell, we joined to raise awareness, and we detailed there some of the steps that we did to ensure people could have a mental good well-being, of course, through these difficult months. And, during the lockdown, we also helped by ensuring that, of course, even on our websites, there were training initiatives on there so people could understand how can I try and make sure that I can be active even in this lockdown situation. So well-being was absolutely of primary importance to us. Then, of course, there comes the financial side to it. And, same with Steve, same with Sarah. We've been very, very lucky in the fact that we've worked very well together. We're lucky enough that we've got FIFA UEFA as well. FIFA came out with a particular grant that we were able to use for the football family. There was about £1 million available to us in that. We've worked very closely with the UK government, and of course, I'm delighted to say the National Lottery came through. And again, there was about £750,000 there. Together with the grants that we've been working on with Sport Wales and others, we've been able to put a package together to our clubs to help them through these difficult times when they don't have that match day income, which, let's be honest, at a key level, outside of elite, at a key level, that is ultimately the lifeblood of an awful lot of associations and an awful lot of clubs in their local communities. That match day income, that club income is vital to ensure that they can survive. And we shouldn't look at this as just the players on the field. You take a club like Barry, Barry's a club with about 14, 15 different teams. But ultimately, if that top team isn't there and operating, they can't support the rest of the local community. So it's absolutely vital that we support not only the clubs that you see on the TV, but actually everything that goes behind. And that is, as Sarah said, all of the junior teams, all of the girls teams, all of the disabled teams. They're really, really important to ensure that that community can keep going. So we've looked at the support, both from a wellbeing point of view and also from a financial point of view.
Steve, I guess the same question for you as well, but I know that your English counterparts, they've just been given another sort of injection of money from this winter fund. Do you feel that you've had enough as a Welsh organisation, a Welsh union, or, would you always like some more? Is it a matter of being willing to accept what you've had, or do you need more to survive?
Well, there's multiple questions in there, isn't there? So I think to go back to your first one, I think we've just got to acknowledge that we've, so far we've got a lot of support from Welsh Government, led by, Sarah, and, very well, received and targeted at the, the community game. I think, my stories are going to be the same as Jonathan, it's just, we've done a lot to try and maintain the funding in the community space for our own resources. Because we have to deal with the program through a different tool, if you like. But we can only give, what we are doing is giving ordinarily what the WE would have given them. What we're not picking up is the local stuff. So, give you an example, classic Wales-England rugby match on Saturday. Club told me last week, they would typically expect to take £8,000 over the bar. Now, with social distancing, their estimates now are 1,000. It's these little things that you have to be so alert for. A little bit like Sarah, I know we repurposed some of our funding. We run a sort of facility grant, sort of funding scheme, looking to improve facilities and so forth. Well, we redeployed that immediately because we didn't think it was more COVID emergency type stuff, because we didn't think there was much merit in improving facilities if the club wasn't going to be there in, 2 years' time or whatever it was. But I think that's your last question. That is, kind of fresh news, if I can call it that. So all that came out last Thursday. I've already spoken to Welsh Government, and I think to answer your question, we very much recognise and acknowledge and thank the support to date. And that's all our expectations, I guess, would be that as long as we are treated proportionately and fairly to what England Rugby have had, I don't think we can ask for any more than that, really. But I know the conversations are ongoing and relationships are very good.
Let's move on then to talk maybe a bit about fans, because hot off the press as well, there will be some fans going to that England match, the final weekend of the Autumn Nations Cup. How are you feeling about the fact that fans are now being allowed in England, and how excited are you possibly by the prospect of them being allowed in Wales? And how much are you pushing for that to happen, or are you willing to wait? and see what the situation is, as the Welsh Government seems to be? Or are you putting pressure on the Welsh Government to follow in the footsteps of England and Westminster? Let's go with Steve. You can go first with that one, because it's a rugby match I was alluding to, that last England match.
I think we definitely want crowds back. You know, let's make no bones about that. But I think you've got to take it in the backdrop of, you know, like Sarah said, you know, this is a public health issue first and foremost. So I think we need to recognise that. But the reasons, there's multiple reasons for wanting crowds back. Like I said at the beginning, there's obviously a financial play, but it's much wider than that. It's like I said to the beginning. You know, I've been to, you know, a couple of test matches recently, and it does not feel right. So I think we need the crowds back to bring the best out of the players, and the fan base, particularly in Wales. They're great. They're brilliant at supporting the Welsh team. So one goes alongside each other. So do I want crowds back for our match on the 5th of December? Absolutely I do. And if it's a case of, even if it's not economically viable, I'd probably still do it, because it sets the scene and it creates the right environment.
Are you actively pushing for that to happen, Steve? Is there a conversation going on between the Welsh Government and yourselves?
I would say it's active, but it's cautiously active, because we are very respectful of the health implications. So yes, we are active in it, but we'll accept if it's not going to happen as well. You know what I mean, in a sense here. Yeah.
Jonathan, are you also part of this conversation, trying to get fans back here in Wales?
Well, first and foremost, obviously, and Steve said this, public health has got to come first, but I'm going to be a bit more militant, because we've been campaigning the Welsh Government for some time on this, because we firmly believe that sport has got a role in society to play to bring us out of this pandemic, and to do that in a safe and controlled environment. And sport can do that better than anything else. You just need to go into town, on any night of the week, and you'll see hundreds of people, running around, really ignoring social distancing measures that have been put in place. In sport, we can control it. We can do track and trace. We can do temperature testing. You've seen it all before across different countries. And we can do that. We can do that, whether it's in Newtown or Barry, wherever you want it, whether it's the national stadiums, we can all put measures in place to ensure that people, through our ticketing systems, have got appropriate track and trace in place, that we're measured, that obviously we try and control the crowd when, for example, a try is scored or a goal is scored in our sport, to ensure that they don't do that joint celebration. But I firmly believe that we have a role to play, and we've been campaigning hard, the Welsh Government, and we'll be campaigning even harder to ensure that we in Wales do exactly the same as they're doing over the border. Some would say that's irrelevant, but as far as I'm concerned, please remember that this, of course, is a fantastic and fundamental income source to those clubs. That's what makes football and a lot of our sports work at a mid-tier level. Not at the very grassroots, they don't rely on that income. Not at the very top of the game where they've got TV income is it quite so, such a big chunk. But ultimately, the majority of football across the United Kingdom, and it's the same for Steve, it's fundamental. And ultimately, we will play our role to bring it back safely, but we need the government to push on this agenda too.
Sarah, I guess people who are involved with sport in any kind of team, and obviously there's a limit on how many people can be outdoors together at the moment. And over Christmas, we're not sure what's going to happen either, possible changes. 30 is the limit. And I guess people who are involved with clubs want to know when they will be back participating in sport. It's tough to know when it's going to happen, but what would you, as a body, like to see happening, and when would you ideally like to see sport being able to be reintroduced team level wise from grassroots up very soon?
I suppose it's a simple answer, but it's not the one people want to hear. I suppose it's when it's safe and right to do so. That's got to be paramount, and sport has taken that very seriously, which is really important. But to take the question a little bit further, what would we want to see? Young people that have missed out. We may have a future, generation that's missed out on being active because of the impact that it's had at school level. What do we want to see? We want to see education, making sure it's really an active education, and that children particularly get the right level of physical literacy, physical activity, so they've got the habits for life, and that the guys have mentioned, we could miss out on a whole generation of young people that are the foundations of their sports. So, you know, I appreciate some of the difficulties that people are feeling. Frustrated myself, you know, I really enjoy my sport and playing it, but actually it's got to be about when it's right to do so. And ultimately that will be through the regulations.
We did have a comment saying that, as you say, health is so important, mental health, well-being, fitness. Why is it being reintroduced sport from the top down as opposed to grassroots up? Is that a frustration, would you say? I guess it makes sense financially, but for those who need sport as part of their daily routine, is it tough that, you know, the grassroots level where there's enjoyment involved and it's all about the fun, that inevitably is going to be the last thing to be reintroduced? Jonathan?
Yeah, if I may, I'll just touch on the 30 as well, because, I mean, again, I'm going to be a bit more militant on this. I worry that we're being, in organised activities, only able to move as quickly as recreational football, you know, on the recreational grounds around the country. And the reason that we start probably with the top down, I'll come back to grassroots in a second. The reason we start is because that's where we can organise it. That's where ultimately we can make sure that that track and trace is put in place, that we do the temperature testing, that the regulations are followed. And once we've proven, which I'm pleased to say we have, that tier 1, in our case, our Premier League for our men's and our women's works, then we can move to tier 2. And tier 2 now has just been allowed to go back. And so in the coming weeks, we will be bringing our tier 2 back. And of course, hopefully, if that works, we'll be bringing tier 3 back. I'm pleased to say, of course, that the 30 limit, whilst annoying me, and I'll come back if I may to that point, ultimately, up to under 18s, we're allowed to play football already. So the only bit that we're missing effectively is the organised football, primarily adult football, you know, from tiers 2 at the moment, but that's coming back, as I said, so 3 down to tier 10. So a lot of football, yes, a lot of organised and association football is missing out, but hopefully we'll get back there pretty soon. Just back on that 30 number, the reason I'm so annoyed with it, and whilst I understand it, it's led by the government, it's not led by us. We've tried to push to say that we're organised and we can basically prove, and I'm delighted to say with tier 2, we're going to have the opportunity to do that. But there's plenty of inconsistency here. You know, whether it's bingo halls, whether you go out onto the streets of Cardiff and see how many people are out and about, there is inconsistency. What I've always been trying to say is we can organise it, we can manage it, let us do it, let us prove it. And ultimately, having a cap of 30 in my sport is pretty impossible when you need the people from a safeguarding perspective. You need, of course, the first aid officials around you, etc., etc., etc. We need more like 50 branch. Steve, probably equally, if not more numbers. So really, we should look at this for individual sports on an organised basis. And can they do it? Can they do it well? Can they do it within the regulations? Can they do it safely? Our answer is yes, we can. Let us do it.
Steve, do you agree that maybe this one-size-fits-all rule doesn't work in sport?
Yeah, I'm probably in this, you know, I've got probably different challenges to John, but I definitely, let's deal with the top-down thing first. I think, you know, bear in mind, you've got professional athletes, so, you know, that you can control their environment. So, for example, you know, the Wales national team at the moment are in camp. You know, they're tested once a week because, you know, unless you do your testing, you can't play the following week. And they spend now probably more time in the hotel than ordinarily because they are not going back because, of course, you risk the bubble and, you know, all these other new words we've got to learn, you know. So that's all done in a, you know, in a controlled environment. So that's just Wales. That's, of course, you know, our 4 regional sides as well. Now, don't underestimate as well, you know, the cost of running these things as well. You know, these, you know, testing 70 people a week on COVID testing, you know, it comes at a cost, but that can only happen at a pro level because you can control the environment. But I think, you know, to come back on, you know, the one size fits all, you know, I probably got technical challenges then compared to Jonathan because social distancing, whether that be 2 meters, 1 meter, you know, let's be honest, a scrum is not going to work, is it? You know, or a ruck is not going to work. So, you know, we've got new, you know, other issues to deal with. So, you know, we're pushing now more for touch, alternative forms of the game, tens. It's all about, you know, keeping, you know, rugby relevant to everybody because, you know, I fear a little bit like, you know, Sarah and Jonathan, that, you know, sport will not be a habit So people will have fallen out of love with it, and then they won't re-engage. So I think, we're going to try to be as agile in providing a rugby opportunity as best we can. But, it comes back to the regulations, really. We can't do scrum, so we just have to be agile in the form of the game.
Sarah, do you have anything you'd like to add on that one?
Only just coming back in on that piece around adapting, and I think that is really important what Steve's alluded to in terms of sport really is going to need to take this time that has been forced on them in some ways to really, we talk about reimagining how we come back after this pandemic, and it is an opportunity not to come back and deliver exactly what we were delivering before, and to look at opportunities, whether that's around digitalization, whether it's adapted versions of the game, whether it is looking at the competitive season. There are lots of things that sport can be doing during this period to actually make sure that when we do come back, that we come back stronger. And it does link to some of the other pieces that I think the pandemic has really shone a light on some of the inequalities that sport has, and particularly around the women's game. There's been a big impact. The strides that were being made in women's sport have probably been knocked back, and it's a real challenge now to start thinking about how are we going to accelerate that, not just to get back to where we were, but actually to progress that even further. And I know Steve and Jonathan will have plans around that, but also around racing sport, the BME community, again, not as active as others. What are we doing around that? So there's some real questions that, in this space and in this time, that I think sport really needs to think about.
I can see that there are quite a few questions coming in. Do continue to put them in the Q&A box. We will get to them, I promise. We've left some time right at the end to go through as many as we can. So if you do have any questions, I urge you to put them in the Q&A box, and I'll get to them very soon. I just want to ask you about the future and a bit about what next, because when we have a situation, well, not a global pandemic, it doesn't happen every year, but when there's something that challenges us, sometimes it forces us to change. And I'm just wondering, I think we had a question from somebody who registered asking, is a major restructure of amateur and professional sports required in Wales? And does a pandemic like this force it to happen, force your hand in a way, because choices have to be made? Or is it an opportunity maybe to make minor changes to make sure that there's sufficient support for both areas of sport, professional and amateur in Wales? So, Sarah, I'll start with you maybe. Is this an opportunity for change, for good, or maybe not for the better, but does this inevitably lead to change, a pandemic where we are forced to question different aspects of sport across the board?
Yeah, I think, I just, mentioned it in my previous comments with regards to, this is a chance for us to look at what can make sport come back stronger and better, whether that is looking at some of how we invest in sport around the women's game in particular, around racing sport. Is sport fully inclusive? And that is a real challenge for us, to make it inclusive, to improve our diversity. We have a vision that sport is for everyone, and at the moment it probably isn't for everyone. So there's some real thinking and some real challenge around that. We've mentioned the preventative health piece. I think seeing sport and leisure valued in that way, in its contribution to both physical and mental health, is really, really important. And seeing investment in public services, is that going to go into the environments around leisure and sport to enable people to really re-engage, particularly at a community level that may, have disconnected from sport, that we need to bring back into sport. So we're going to need to think about how we can re-engage those people back in, and a workforce. Sport is amateur, as you allude to, really important. The volunteers that every day, day in, day out, and I have to say they've been exceptional through this pandemic. They really have stepped up to the fore, both in terms of enabling sport to happen, but also learning very, very quickly. We've all had to adapt to the new rules and the changes, but they've been at the forefront of making sport happen. So that's some of the things that we will face. And I'm going to bring back education. One of the examples could be an extended school day around how we keep children in that environment, so they remove some of the inequalities that they face, and they have an active couple of hours after school would be really important to us.
Steve, I guess that question in the context of rugby would be, is this an opportunity for restructuring within clubs? Do we need 4 regions? Do we need semi-professional league? Do we need all the leagues below? Do we concentrate maybe the talent that we have in different areas? Do you think this is an opportunity for rugby as a sport to restructure the leagues and the semi-professional and the professional aspect?
I think we came from a WU point of view. We came into this with certain ambitions of we've got about 300 member clubs, and our ambition was to come out with this as many of the 300 clubs as possible. Then you've got we definitely want to keep our 4 regional teams, and indeed what we would call the top end of our community game, which is all the Premiership clubs that you would know, your Connacht's and so forth. So I think, probably a little bit like Jonathan, we've had organisational changes imposed on us, which we had never thought of before. And frankly, I think they're here to stay. Probably going off piste a bit, but if you asked me a year ago what was Zoom, I'd have laughed at you, Now, but I think that, the way that we go about our business now, and I think it's definitely going to be very different. The thought now of, flying to somewhere for a Six Nations meeting, I think that's long gone, or jumping on a train to for an hour's meeting in London, you do wonder now, why on earth would I ever do that again, But I think one of the learnings for us is, we try to keep close as a sort of rugby community, and we've definitely improved our, our communication with clubs as better than it's ever been. So, that's a learning. So we're going to try and take out of this, all the good things that we've learnt. And I think that coming back to perhaps Sarah's point, one of the risks we've got here now is to avoid panic and, you sort of pool your resources and throw it at the international game or the top end of the game. So we're very careful about making sure that the women's game is properly supported. Great that we had 2 great announcements last week in that space, and we've got to be very careful that, like Jonathan's saying, really, we've got to keep, the community clubs going, the junior sections of the community clubs, vitally important, and, all your diversity programs and so forth. So, short answer to your question, I don't think we need revolution, but I think, evolution is going to quietly sneak up on us.
Would you agree, Jonathan?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way we've looked at this, at the start of the pandemic, I came out with this notion that you should do the 3 Ps, it was protect, it was prepare. So protecting, obviously, your business, making sure that, you were financially, hopefully going to survive this. Preparing was hopefully getting back, and then prevail. Prevail was all about how do we come out of this stronger? And when we look at the organisation of football in this country, it's enabled us to probably speed up some of that evolution. Football's always evolving. We have to evolve to make sure our product is relevant for the people that, want to participate, whether that's as a player, a fan, or whatever it may well be. Over this time, literally over the last year or so, we've reorganised, our men's structure has changed. We were due to launch our Tier 3 when we can go back. That's got a very new structure in our men's game. Our women's game, I'm pleased to say, has just been through a major restructure that will be coming through to the fore following the consultation period in the next couple of years. That will allow appropriate football being played, the right standard with the right economic means, the right geographical locations, the right facilities and the right club culture. It's very important to try and get that right. But it's not just the sort of the typical pyramid approach, it's also. And of course, I'm also pleased to say at a sort of a junior level, the small sided game, we went through a very extensive review. We brought that to the table and that's now been approved. And ultimately, changing the regulations on mini football will ensure, of course, that the football experience for those people that play at that level, for children, young people throughout Wales, will ensure that they get better game time, better opportunities and a better match day culture. So it's not just the way in which we structure the pyramid, it's the way in which we actually play football. And those things you need to do to ensure that you are making sure that everybody likes the product you have available to them.
Last question from me before I sort of go to the questions that have been submitted. I've just had a quick look and there are some specifics there for you. But just looking ahead now as we try and get ourselves out of this pandemic with a vaccine coming up hopefully very, very soon. What would you say are your priorities going ahead? And I know it's, a tough one, maybe there are many that you'd like to look at, but Sarah, maybe you can start us off. as we try and get grassroots sport back up and running, as we try and get crowds back, as we try and look to the Tokyo Olympics and so forth, what would you say as an organisation are your priorities?
I think it's making sure we protected sports so that we've been able to have those sports facilities, those sports clubs are still there. We've got to make sure that they're ready and able to welcome people back in the right way so that we bring the community through in sport. But I think working with the wider community around education, around working with public health and Natural Resources Wales, to bring others into the fold around the wider physical activity and sport piece is really important to us, making sure our elite athletes continue to train and are focused and are fit and well to go on to Tokyo and to the Commonwealth Games. I think those would probably be our main priorities coming up.
Steve?
I think, perhaps as a collective group, we think we need to keep, sport very relevant between us all, and that's not limited to, Jonathan and myself. I think priorities would be looking forward. So, whatever it is, so if you look even at, rugby season, 21, 22, you want to be back perhaps where you were, a year ago. So, a little like Jonathan alluded to earlier, we've definitely got a risk as well of participation numbers, so we are down because frankly, people can't play. I suppose the flip side of that would be we've had people registering, albeit there's no game to play. So, we're treating that as a bit of optimism. But I think if you wanted, my headline would be, it's just sport has to be relevant. And, a lot of my job is to make sure that, rugby is relevant.
I'm a journalist, Steve. I love a headline. Thank you for that one. Jonathan, yourself?
Well, if you want the headlines, we're going to win Euro 2021. We're going to qualify for the FIFA World Cup, and our women's team are going to get through the playoffs and qualify for the European Championships as well. Now, let's take it back to basics. Public health, of course, we've got to be mindful of that. I'm pleased to say we've got a new strategic plan that's coming out next year, our 2021 to 2026 plan. 2026, we're 150 years old, so that's going to be a major anniversary time. But ultimately, when I say take it back to basics, it's quite simple, really. We're all here to promote our sports, we're all here to develop our sports, and we're all here to protect our sports. And ultimately, if we can do that and we can ensure that everybody wants to come back and play sport, don't just mean football, play sport, and we can develop people to ensure that they can be the best they can be, whatever they want to be, whatever level they want to play at, as long as we're there to help coach them through and enable them to do that. And then obviously make sure in protection that it's a fit environment for them to do so they feel safe. And of course, that means, of course, health and well-being, but also safeguarding. They're the key three things. That's all we do, is we protect, we develop, and we promote.
Fantastic. That's enough from me. I'm going to go to the questions that have been sent in. And once again, thank you very much for all your questions. There are quite a few. We'll go through them. If you want to add some more, please do so. There's about 15 minutes left. Sarah, I think this one is for you, actually. This is from Harry in Ceredigion. I come from Mid Wales, Ceredigion, and over the last few years have wanted to follow in the footsteps of both Olympic and Commonwealth Game medalists, but find my paths being blocked. What is being done to allow Mid Wales a fair chance to engage in those sports? And I guess this has always been a problem that people would say in Mid Wales because they're slightly maybe out on a limb, they would argue, but maybe it's been even highlighted even further with this pandemic at the moment.
Well, I think number one, I'd want to understand why this individual can't progress, because we should be able to ensure that everybody can. I recognise geographical challenges are difficult. We haven't, for the size of the nation, got top class facilities across all of Wales, but it's making sure we invest in those, and pathways we talk about, but being able to invest so that athletes with the ability can progress through to the top ranks wherever they live in Wales. We should be able to remove those barriers, whether it's facilities or whether it's access to good coaching, working with the sports to be able to identify what are the issues and make sure that we remove those issues for those individuals, because anybody in Wales who is talented should be able to get to their peak performance.
Jonathan, this is for you. This is from Lynn. Our club consists of sides from under 7 to seniors and vets. We have already lost our youth side and many juniors have not returned. Our seniors won last year's Alliance Premiership but have lost over half their squad. What can you put in place to reassure clubs there is a future for grassroots football in Wales? Why is senior football constricted by the squad numbers, and what update can you give clubs that this is being looked at?
Well, the squad numbers goes back to the conversation we're having about the 30 number, and of course that's driven by the Welsh Government regulations. Please be assured, Lynn, we continue to campaign the Welsh Government, as I was saying earlier, in the hope that those numbers will be increased. As for grassroots, yes, we're all worried with regards to grassroots football. Of course, as I mentioned, participation numbers are going to be down, but we're working tirelessly to ensure that football can come back. I'm pleased to say Tier 1, now Tier 2, and anything from under 18 and below is back. And we're working tirelessly to make sure everybody can come back in a safe, controlled environment. And we all hope the grassroots football comes back, hopefully as strong as it always was.
This is quite an important one. Sorry, I'm flicking through them very quickly. So apologies if I don't get to your question. I'm just trying to go through them as I flick through them. Chris, a lot of the discussion here has been around elite sport, and I agree, and I apologise about that, or those on the next level down. But how is sport going to work with education moving forward? And trying to get kids, I guess, moving a bit. That's a really important point because, yes, I have been asking about elite sport and crowds and stuff, but how do we get kids active once again when maybe they've been pushed a bit, maybe not to go outside as much as they were, you know, that 1 hour we were talking about right at the start of the pandemic? How do we get sport to excite kids once again? I guess from a personal level physically and from a watching sport and being sort of driven by seeing other sports women and men. Who wants to go with that one?
I was going to say, maybe I'll come in on that one because I've raised the education piece a number of times. You know, schools are absolutely vital, and the experience that teachers give both at primary and secondary to young children, you know, sets them up for life. It's got to be an enjoyable experience. It's got to be diverse in its range of sports that are offered. And we talk about creating physical literacy. You talk about the importance of literacy and numeracy. Well, physical literacy is just as important. I think to rebalance the opportunities that children have missed, there is an opportunity to look at the school environment and being able to provide something additional, you know, whether that's extending the school day. And I don't mean around teachers being extended. I mean about actually bringing in a workforce to look at how we can offer much more activity to young people within that setting. That community school setting is vitally important, and it will be a priority for us at Sport Wales.
I think just to supplement that, we've been, yw'r have been running what we call the school club hub officer, where we effectively go, we share the cost of a, in my language, a PE master with the school, and we've got about 80 or 90 of them, throughout Wales, and they're very, very effective because, what you've effectively got in the school is a captive audience. So, to support Sarah, that is really working really well with us. So it creates this, it creates the rugby in the school, and it creates a really good bridge between the school and the local club. And, we've been doing that now for 2 or 3 years, and, we're certainly looking to extend that.
Jonathan, we've got another question to yourself, because you did mention that we were going to win the Euros earlier. Obviously, fans are thinking about the Euros at the moment, and obviously it's a different Euros this time round with so many cities involved, and it's quite challenging for fans as well. This question from Gavin: is the FAW lobbying UEFA, the Welsh and UK governments about Baku as a venue, medium haul travel going to be difficult, but also serious security concerns? Are you maybe putting pressure at all for a different Euros again, that there is one country going to be looking after it? Are you involved in any discussions like that?
Yes, I am involved in discussions. I don't think the Euro will take place in one country. I think, they're too close to the event, literally just 7 months away. to cancel a plan that is currently spread across, 12 different countries. That's going to make it incredibly difficult to then organise, whether it be in a Germany or Russia or in England. It's just cost prohibitive for UEFA to do that. But what I do think is probably likely is we will see those 12 that are currently hosting probably reduced a little. I would have probably, if I'm a betting man, said Baku is probably on that list. I mean, we've got to remember they are currently not everybody's favourite. I mean, there's a bit of an issue going on with Armenia, if I remember correctly. And, I would have thought that that's going to, have a little bit of an issue, both for travelling fans, for us as a team. Remember, that's our host location. That's where our team is supposed to have its team base. So I this space. That said, do I think this will be a Euro like any other? No. Do I think fans will be able to travel freely? No. I think it's going to be a very different experience, unfortunately, because this pandemic, unfortunately, has got its grasp on us, and it will take us, even with, of course, a vaccine around the corner, it will take some time. So unfortunately, as Steve said earlier, I think we're probably talking next season when we hopefully will get some sort of normality back. Let's just hope we can get Euro safely away. Let's hope some people can enjoy it, whether that's on the sofa or whether that's in the stands.
Yes, indeed. Question from David. Steve, this is for you. A lack of rugby on terrestrial TV. I fear for grassroots rugby and our national team in the future with a lack of rugby on terrestrial TV to gain interest at a grassroots level. Pay-per-view for regional rugby is taking it away from lots of children. I guess that's not a COVID-related question, but in a way, if we are talking about participation, I guess children, if they see a sport, it does help with participation, and that has been a problem during COVID. Your take on that question, maybe, that David is obviously worried about grassroots rugby and rugby not being visible for the next generation.
Yeah, it's a fair question, and it's a recurring question. This is all about balance. So professional rugby, has its costs, and it is quite expensive to run, especially if you want to be competitive. So I think the answer here is it's going to be a balance between pay TV and free to air. And I think that is probably the best way, the best model. So I completely acknowledge the question. But then, the way you supplement that then is with highlight packages and so forth. But, to keep being able to, supply players and, support the professional costs, there's probably going to be, a pay TV piece here, because that's where, there's premiums being paid. I understand the fan frustration. Like I said to you, I think it's a balance, somewhere in between, of a mixture.
We've got another question from Thomas, a Welsh speaker o Abertawe from Swansea, but he's studying in Belgium. So thanks for listening over in Belgium, Thomas. He says, there's talk about making sport inclusive for all. What exact steps, framework are being put in place by your organisations to ensure that happens? How do we ensure that we don't lose sight of inclusivity with other issues being so prominent at the moment? And I guess that comes under the mental health thing. It's more important than ever that we're all involved in sport. So how is your organisation making sure that it's a priority to get as many people as we can involved? Sarah, do you want to go first?
I think, number one, it needs to be talked about as a priority. It needs to be acted upon. So, we can talk about things a lot, but actually, unless we take action, we're not going to see the real difference. From our side, we can do things within our organisation to make sure we're inclusive and we're diverse in our decision making and what we do within Sport Wales, but also we need to consider how we invest in sport to proactively address some of the inequalities that we see. And we've been able to do that through the Be Active Wales programme and a number of programmes to try and make sport more inclusive and more diverse. But, there's a recognition, number one, there is a lot more for us all to do.
Steve?
Yeah, exactly. Couldn't support that even more. I think I said it earlier, one of the risks, when you're facing a financial crisis is those would be the sort of areas that you would look to neglect. And, luckily enough, we've been very disciplined in not, going anywhere near those. So, we've been promoting our rugby game, and it's a game for all shapes and sizes, regardless of ability. So we're very strong in that place, and it's not something that we're going to shy away from, helped with, Sarah's support and so forth.
Jonathan?
Yeah, we've got a new EDI manager, Equality, Diversity and Inclusivity manager. They're working on their strategy. They're in a consultation phase at the moment. We work with an equality advisory group that we put up. We worked across in consultation with our staff group, with all of our key stakeholders to draw up that strategy. And that strategy will be signed off, I hope, at our next board meeting. It was very well received on its first pass. And we've got to work together to ensure that we bring that strategy to life. We can't just talk about it. We've got to act on it. And it's the actions that are the most important here. And of course, I'm pleased with some of the progress that has been made, but there's a lot more work that's got to be done. There's a lot further to go, but I'm confident with our manager in place, with a new head of people coming onto the FAW as well, that we will get there. It will take time, too long, but ultimately I'm pleased with the progress they've made, and I'm very excited about the new strategy for equality, diversity, inclusion for football in Wales.
And Sarah, this question for you. Matt is asking, what are the challenges, the main challenges facing sports that don't have the scale and resources of rugby and football in Wales? Are there some sports possibly that are under more pressure than others? And obviously, we're talking football and rugby, they sometimes grab the headlines, but what about the lesser talked about sports maybe?
Yeah, I think, it is, and there's an acknowledgement, it is a real challenge for them, because I think one of the things that we've all found is being able to communicate to our volunteers, to our clubs, to enable them to be able to, address the pandemic. And when you haven't got the resources of the back office staff, communications teams and all the things that come with that, it is really, really difficult. And the majority of sports still in Wales is run by volunteers, and that's at administrative level as well as out on the field. So we've been working extremely hard with the Welsh Sports Association to provide that additional support to be able to help those sports to communicate. I think that's the main thing. They've been able to reach out. And I have to say, digital has made a big difference in being able to listen to the community clubs and being able to support them and listen to the issues that they face.
I'm going to apologise to anybody who has sent in a question that I haven't read out. Maybe we can get you an answer later on, or maybe we can make sure that your comments have been seen by the panel, but time is against us. I'm just thinking maybe to wrap things up, we could have some very quick final thoughts from the three of you about looking ahead once more, and when you hope that we will be talking about a normal sporting life here in Wales. Jonathan?
My last plea is to say to the Welsh Government, let sport be a partner of yours to ensure that hopefully we can all work together to bring normality back to society here in Wales. Steve, final thought?
John's got the punchline there, so 100% support Jonathan there, but I think if we can get as many clubs through regions, rugby participation, for what I would realistically think would be now next season, I think we'll have done well.
And Sarah?
I think my parting shot would be that, sport really matters. And if we can get people across the board in Wales to recognise that, from government right through education, health, etc., then the power of sport can really be seen and valued.
I just want to thank the three of you for your time this evening. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi am ymuno gyda ni. I know we haven't gone through all the questions, but as I said, hopefully we can get those comments to you. And just thank you everybody at home listening and watching. Hopefully we've answered some of your questions, and we've given you food for thought anyway, looking ahead. It's been a tough few months. We all need sport in our lives, don't we? It's not the same in a rugby stadium, in a football stadium, watching hockey, swimming. It's just not the same without the crowds there. And hopefully we can get some kind of normality and that same excitement back in our lives very, very soon. Jonathan, Steve, Sarah, diolch yn fawr iawn I chi. Thank you very much, and thank you everybody at home. We will see you very, very soon, maybe for another session. Zoom wave, everybody. Nos da, good night.
Thank you.
Nos da.